Auditorium. And in 1963, this is known as the site of the stand in the schoolhouse door. And if you kind of glance over your right shoulders, or left shoulders if you're on this side, you'll see the plaque over there that tells the story of when Governor George Wallace stood right in that alcove, the far right alcove right here, crossed his arms at a podium, and refused to allow two African-American students to walk through the doors of Foster, which is where they used to register for classes. Okay, so that's where you would go. No, my Bama back in the day, you walked in there with a little card, and they signed off on your card, and that's how you got your classes. That story is sort of a long one, so I'm going to do a really quick version. And the quick version is that in 1962, Wallace was running for governor under an incredibly strong segregationist ticket. He had run for offices in the past as a pretty progressive guy. In fact, he wasn't really a hardcore segregationist as he ran for those offices throughout the 50s and early 60s, right? But he lost every one. And he had a very close advisor who said to him, dude, you're being out N-I-G-G-E-R-E-D in these elections. You are not coming down hard enough on segregation. You are letting black folk issues guide your campaigns. So Wallace decides to run on a pretty strong segregationist ticket, and he spends the entirety of the year of 1962 going through and giving his stump speech about segregation yesterday, today, forever. You're familiar with that sort of expression that comes out of our memory of George Wallace. So as he's running for governor and he gets the seat and he takes office in January of 1963, at the same time, the Kennedy administration up in DC is running a pro-civil rights campaign. Kennedy runs in 1959 leading into 60, right? 60 leading into 61. Runs in 60, takes office in 61. It says, one of my big planks is desegregating every institution of public ed in the South. At that point, Arkansas was desegregated. Mississippi and Alabama were sort of the last holdouts. And if you know James Meredith's story at Ole Miss, this happens, I believe, in 1960, 61. Alabama becomes the last state to desegregate. And the Kennedys, John in the White House and Robert in the Department of Justice as Attorney General, decided that they were going to take their stand in Alabama. Okay? Down here, George Wallace was going to take his last stand here at the University of Alabama. He knew full well that there was going to be a negotiation to desegregate campus, and the Kennedys knew this as well. So between January of 63 leading into June of 1963, they planned what we learned about a few days ago as an image event. Okay? This was a fait accompli. Two black students were going to walk through those damn doors whether Wallace liked it or not. Okay? And Kennedy, whether he liked it or not, was going to have to face a very stringent and sort of obstinate George Wallace. He was going to have to meet George Wallace on his home turf at the spot at which the students would actually move onto campus. But it was a fait accompli. It was already a done deal. But they staged an image event in order to make it look like Wallace was being asked to move aside, and he would do so reluctantly, and he would, doff his left shoulder, and in would walk the students. It was planned. Media was invited. We didn't have Farrah Hall at the time, so we climbed all the way out past onto the quad, past where Denny Chimes is, even like all that way. And in anticipation of this image event, Wallace shows up in the morning, has his breakfast on the second floor, has his lunch on the second floor as the media corps gathers, as the press corps gathers. He delivers the speech that you have in this pamphlet here on page 6, this proclamation. And the idea behind the image event was that the Attorney General would send a representative to ask Wallace to move aside. Wallace would refuse. He would deliver the speech. And then someone from the state of Alabama, who is a federal National Guardsman, would show up and ask him to move aside, and he would, because that guardsman was from where? Alabama. And because Wallace had to answer to his people, he would reluctantly, but yes, move aside for that deputized National Guardsman. Okay. Two students would walk through, and campus would be changed. And it did. It was slow going, but campus was changed. The speech, you'll notice, I won't read it, but he makes two main arguments, and they're what you might expect. One argument is states' rights. So the idea that he's taking this last rebel stand in that alcove, little man, little ideas, that little alcove over there, works alongside Confederate discourse such as the unwelcomed, unwanted, unwarranted, force-induced intrusion upon the campus of UA, of the might of the central government, offers frightful examples of the oppressions of rights and privileges and duties of the state by officers of the federal government. This intrusion is basically a travesty of justice, and the threat of force is unconstitutional, both U.S.-wise and state-wise. So he makes a states' rights argument. He also makes a populist argument where he says that I stand here before you I stand here before you in the place of thousands of Alabamians whose presence would kind of, they'd be all over you if I didn't stand here, because I represent the people, right? That these citizens, however humble they may be, through their chosen representatives, ought to stand courageously, right? Essentially, when they elect me as a segregationist, I need to be there for the people. It ain't even just me, it's them, it's the people. So he makes these two arguments, which are exact duplicates of Jefferson Davis's 1961 address when he took the Confederacy presidency oath at the state steps in Montgomery. It's kind of interesting. Y'all should do an analysis of that someday. Now, for us moving forward from here, I think it's easy to kind of tear down the structures of segregation. What's interesting for us is where we're standing and what's behind me, so what you're facing right now. So you think about, for decades, this space here was George Wallace's space. He was the agent. It was his story. It was his stand in the schoolhouse story. And when they threatened, they being the university, threatened to tear this down in 2011 because there was that crap in the attic and asbestos in the walls and there were toxins in the water supply, and it would be easier just to take this historical building down and build a new one than to fix it up. Students like you and faculty like me came out in droves to get it saved. We saved Foster Auditorium, and part of it being refurbished was doing something with what was a parking lot at the time. This is a huge parking lot. What do we do for the students, authoring Vivian Malone and James Hood, who walked through those doors? Not the dude who stood in the door. What do we do for those people who walked through the doors, who changed the course of history for us, standing here? And the idea was to have a competition among architects. The one that won out is Malone Foot Plaza and the authoring Lucy Clock Tower, so that the agency gets shifted. Look where are your backs right now? George Wallace. What are you looking at? Future, right? So rhetorical choices, you guys, right? Rhetorical choices. These architects didn't just say, while they're eating their Cheerios in the morning, I have an idea for a plaza and a clock tower. These things are strategic. So for instance, if you look at the clock tower, how would you unpack that as a rhetorical piece of discourse, right? How would you unpack that clock tower? Not to be too nerdy about it, but
the symbol on it is the scales of justice, I think.
It's not the scales of justice, but it is the bunting that's on either side of Foster Auditorium. It's on either side over there. And the arches with the sconce at the top and the two notches, the two concrete notches, are the exact cutouts here of the alcoves of all the lower windows here on, I guess, what would be the second floor. Okay? Those are glass, though. Those shut out, right? Those windows keep people out. What's up with these alcoves over here? What makes that different? Yeah. Some architect knew what she or he was doing, right? Like these arches move through. And is there one arch over here? There's four. What's important about four? Huh? Maybe not necessarily the number four, but what's important about it being open on all sides? Do you think?
Just open, yeah.
Openness.
Inclusive to everyone.
Inclusiveness. Yeah. You make your own path. There's a flow, right? There's a flow through these alcoves, and they face this way, and they face out to Central Campus. And I think the clock tower itself, the Authoring Lucy Clock Tower, the faces of the clock, where there are also four, one clock looking back at time, remembering time, but the other three looking out, right, towards Central Campus and New Campus and the Strip and Old Campus that way as well, that the clocks of time, right, it's the full cycle of temporality, that it represents looking back, but also looking forward. Kind of cool stuff, right? I mean, kind of neat. The fact that the clock tower itself replicates, even in the brick structure and the base, the varying ways that Foster is constructed, shows that it's a sign, but it stands out, right? It stands aside and out. The notion of a tower is that, like a church steeple, it reaches up to truth. It reaches higher than where we are ephemerally on the ground, right? So the clock tower is about light, justice, equity, inclusivity, diversity, values that are held above little man, little ideas, and output. And the idea, let's keep on. And the idea that it's a plaza means that we can, the Malone Foot Plaza means that we can all gather.